Welcome to Classic 4x4, the podcast for and by classic four-wheel drive enthusiasts. I'm your host, Chris Piccone, and you can follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook at classic4x4_trucks. Also, make sure you subscribe to the show on your podcast listening platform and check out our website at classic4x4.com. And make sure to reach out to us if we can help you sell your classic, custom, and modified truck or 4x4. Well, hello, Classic 4x4 podcast listeners. I'm your host, Chris Piccone, and we have made it to episode 8 of season 3. As many of you know, season 3 is all listener requested topics and guests. And today's guest is not only a legend in our world, right? But was also requested by somebody that was rather unique and interesting that you probably all don't expect. So I want to welcome on the podcast today, the one, the only, the legend. I have coined him the Godfather of trucks and 4x4s, Stacey David. What's going on, Stacey?
Hey, Chris, it's great to be here, man. That's quite an introduction, man. I hope I can live up to it.
Hey, you've already lived up to it, my man. So, Stacey, I can't thank you enough for being on the Classic 4x4 podcast.
Great to be here, man.
All your support and everything. In the pre-interview today, I was telling Stacey who requested this episode, so I have to share it with all of our listeners.
You got to tell the story.
This is good, man. So when I would happen to mention to my wife, when I was starting to record season 3, that it's all going to be listener requests, she said to me, and keep in mind, I'm going to give a little background here. My wife is not a big fan of trucks. She loathes my trucks to the point where she actually made me find an offsite garage to put them, a mile away so she doesn't have to stare at them and have me just at the house playing with them all day long. But she said to me, you know what, can I request a guest? And I said, okay, like, who do you even know in the truck and 4x4 world? And she goes, I want to hear Stacey David. So
that's awesome. So is she listening?
Yeah,
she better be listening.
She's actually in her office in the garage that I converted for her office after she kicked me out of it, and I had to move to my offsite garage.
Yeah.
So
and what's her name?
Her name is Lauren.
Hey, Lauren.
Yes.
Hey.
So
thank you.
Yeah.
Did we like go to school together or something, Lauren? Why in the world would you request me?
So we're going to talk about it a little bit later in the podcast on how my wife even knows who you are, right? Number one. But number two, where that little spot in her brain where Stacey David's name lives.
Yeah.
So this episode, it was requested by my beautiful and amazing wife, Lauren. Shout out to her for requesting today's episode. But let's move on, Stacey, and let's talk about you. Our listeners really like to know, who the person is behind the build, behind the screen, and how does a kid from Boise, Idaho, end up, in Nashville with their own custom shop, their own production company, and is coined the Godfather of trucks and 4x4s.
Well, that's a long story. I mean, I tell you what, there's a lot of aspects to it. I'm actually writing a book about all of that now because there's so many different aspects of that. But I was a professional musician. Well, before that, I was always a car person. And I mean, from my earliest memories, there's pictures of me 3-4 years old, in the family picture, and I've got like a marshmallow in one hand and a tractor in the other. I mean, I was always completely enamored with anything mechanical. And it didn't really matter. I mean, cars, trucks, bulldozers, tracked vehicles, snowmobiles, anything with a motor, anything mechanical. I mean, the egg beater intrigued me. And needless to say, I tore all that stuff up around the house trying to figure out how it worked. But so I always had that. And of course, music was always that. I was like that for guitar too. And I started taking guitar lessons at 6 years old. And so I started playing, and I started playing professionally at 15, which was an interesting story because I was too young to play in bars, but my parents managed to get around that on some occasions. But anyway, I ended up moving back here to Nashville to make a living as a professional musician. And it's a lot different. People are like, well, so you wanted to be a star. It's like, no, I wanted to be a professional musician, and that means you get paid to play.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a really good run at that. I did it 20 some years and got a whole history. And I incorporate that into the show a lot. I do the custom guitar, some of which on the wall here behind me. For all of the big builds that I do, there's a custom guitar that goes with it. And so that's how that all kind of went together and continues. And I still do a lot of music stuff to this day. But so that's how I got to Nashville. And then now the crazy thing, when I started doing, I already had an idea of doing an automotive TV show because those didn't exist. This was like in the mid 90s. And I don't know. I was Nashville Network was right here in town, TNN, one of the biggest cable networks in existence at the time. And they had all the hunting, fishing shows, all that stuff. And I'm like, there's gotta be a way to do an automotive show because everybody likes that. And then, like I said, nothing like that existed. And then I actually had approached them at TNN about 95. I still have the letter. And I pitched them a show which is basically very similar to what Gearz is. And they were like, oh, we love it. We'd like to see a pilot. And I'm like, pilot?
Yeah. I'm a guy who doesn't play guitar.
Yeah, it's a pilot. And then I started checking around and a pilot's like $10,000. And that was back then.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, I don't So I'm trying to move forward to get some sort of clip, video representation of what I want to do. A couple of years goes by and I had told my friends that is in the music industry, around what I was wanting to do. And I was getting kind of frustrated. And then a couple of shows come out. Dennis Gage comes out with My Classic Car, and who has become one of my closest friends in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis and I, we've both been doing it a long time. But then there was Hot Rod and Horsepower, was Horsepower and Car and Driver that were done here in town. And so I knew I was on the right path. And then one day a buddy of mine comes in. This is going to blow you away. A guy comes in and goes, "Did you see Sunday's paper?" And I'm like, "No, I'm a musician. Why? What was it?" He said there was an ad in the paper that they want to host for this new truck show.
Hold on a second.
So
let's roll back. You ended up on trucks from an ad in a newspaper.
Ad in the newspaper.
That is completely wild.
Yeah. Newspaper. What is that? Yeah. Most people don't even know what a newspaper is anymore.
Now it's just a social media post.
But it was crazy because I went in there and then because people always say, "Oh, well, that was such a lucky deal." And I was like, "Yeah, no, because I was an athlete growing up and I had this football coach that he'd come in before the games and he'd go, 'There's no such thing as luck. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity.'" And we're all like, yeah, whatever. But I always remembered that. And that was a prime example of that because in the meantime, I had opened up a custom shop here in town. I was building cars. Keep in mind, I was a car guy all these years. And I was building my own cars. And then I started building customer cars all through this professional musician era. Mm-hmm. And so I had two lives going. I would go into the recording studio with fingers that were just bloody and beat up. And people were like, "Dude, what is up with your hands? And what's the scars on your arms?" And I'm like, "Take a look in the parking lot," And they'd be like, "Oh, that's so cool." It was a Corvette or it was a Jeep or whatever. And so I was doing both of those things. And I kept documenting my pictures of my builds and this and that. And also being a professional musician, I was on camera a lot. I did a lot of TV commercials and a lot of television stuff. So I knew how that worked. So when I went in to audition for this, they said, "Have you ever built any vehicles?" Because there were thousands of people that answered this ad. Mm. And most were professional actors. "Yes, Johnny, I know." That kind of thing. But they weren't real car guys. So they said, "Okay, have you ever built any real vehicles?" And I had a whole portfolio of crazy stuff. And they said, "Okay, have you ever been on camera before?" I'm like, "Well, here's some television stuff I did and a commercial I did with these guys and all this." And they were like, so all of those things lined up. And they were like, "You're the perfect person to do this." And so I tell people, it's like, if you're in a job, if you're doing something and you're bored with it, then you're not taking advantage of learning to go to the next step, because you can't go to the next step until you learn what you need to learn there. Same thing with restoring a vehicle. There's a lot of guys that get into it and they're like, well, I want to be a custom builder. I'm like, but can you restore something original yet? Because you need to understand that before you get into the custom world, if you're going to be really good at it.
So true.
And a lot of people want to step past the steps, and that makes them really vacant in some areas, when it comes to building projects or this and that. It's kind of like your story when you decided to go in and start selling vehicles. Well, you sold them because you knew the vehicles. You already had the background. So that's important. So anyway, that's actually kind of the short version.
That is super cool.
I mean, trucks all started. And then the crazy thing is, a lot of people don't realize this. The idea behind trucks, when Joe St. Lawrence had originally come up with the idea for it, keep in mind, they were doing car and driver, which was basically test driving new vehicles. So his concept for trucks was that we were going to be test driving new trucks, and I'd be putting on like tonneau covers and bumpers and that kind of thing. And I told Joe, I was like, listen, I'm not interested in doing a fake show, because those shows existed. The toolboxes were empty and the air compressors weren't hooked up. It was just a set. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm a real builder. I want to do real stuff. And that's where it was very similar to where he said, that's what we want. We want you to do you. And they left me alone. And so the first year I chopped a top on, we jumped into the Wicked Willies. I mean, nobody had ever seen anything like that on TV.
And keep in mind, these guys are sitting there like, oh my God, why do we tell him that? He's pulling bodies off frames.
Oh my God.
He's doing ground up.
The crazy thing is that people don't understand the battles that I fought in those early days. I was bucking so much tradition from television guys. They were like, you can't do that. Nobody wants to see that. Everything, right down to the type of shirt that I wore. They were like, well, we have to have a button-up shirt because you got to put the microphone. You see this hole in my shirt? That's where my microphone goes.
There you go.
And that goes clear back to, I took a knife and I punched a hole in my T-shirt because I'm a T-shirt guy. But see, oh no, those first few seasons of trucks, I had to wear a button-up shirt. And all kinds of just crazy. You think about it now, people be like, that's crazy. But, even with the two hosts, everything, there was all these barriers we had to break down. And the only thing that was saving us, our ratings were huge.
Yeah.
Because people wanted to see that. And that gave ground because of those sort of shows. After that came Monster Garage and all of those things that showed real fabrication and building.
I got to tell you, that is absolutely wild. I mean, I never expected you to tell me that started from a newspaper ad, but like from those show creators and producers aspect, like they had 1,100 or over 1,000 people that applied. So they're doing all these auditions and they're asking all these people the same question. And some people are saying, yes, I've been in front of a camera. And others are saying, but I've never built anything. Other people say, yeah, I built something, but I've never been in front of a camera. And then you show up and you're like, oh yeah, here's my portfolio of what I built. And oh yeah, here's my reels of what I've. These guys must have sat back and must have like quietly been like, oh my God, this is exactly what we wanted. Oh yeah, like this is it. We found the guy.
Yeah. And I tell you what, one of the things that was really interesting, you'll never guess what I drove there.
What was it?
When I showed up, they went out because one of the guys, he said, we'll know if this guy's a real car guy, if he's a real truck guy by what he drives. I pulled up. This was my daily driver, a 1970 J3000 Jeep truck.
No way!
With a big winch on it. It was that teal, green, and white, big tires on it.
Yeah, did it have the 401 in it?
Oh, yeah. No, it actually had the Buick 350 in it.
Oh, get out of here.
That was that 1 year only weird Buick thing. And he went out and looked at that in the parking lot. And he goes, this is the guy.
So I actually have a J truck in my collection right now. I have a 82 J10 with 65,000 original miles, all original. I mean, everything works. It's immaculate. Sadly, I need to make some room, and I'm going to pass it on down the line. And I'm actually, selling it right now. But I got to tell you,
is it a long bed or short bed?
It's a long bed town side.
Yeah.
So
I love those trucks.
It was what was called I guess somebody had told me this once. They called the model that I have, it was the custom, it was the base model, but they used to call it, the way that dealers ordered it, they called it the Rancher Special. So it has the 258 into the T177, right? Not the T176, because the 177 needs the longer output shaft for the longer bulkhead in the SJ body, into the NP. I think it's a 208, into an NP 208. And I got to tell you, but it also has the factory brush guard and the rear tow bumper. So that was, I guess, dealers back in the day. It was originally a Montana truck. Dealers back in the day, they used to order that kind of base model for like the ranch hands, right? But I love it. I'm a big fan of the 258.
It's a great engine. It's fantastic. Best engine they did.
I will tell you, especially in the SJs, like most of the SJs have 360s in them. I'm not the biggest 360 fan. They're not reliable. I'll go for a 258 over a 360 all day long. And you can never find the 401s, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a question for you on the J trucks.
Yes.
What's your favorite grill? Do you like the Gladiator grill, the Razor grill?
Razor grill. Definitely Razor grill.
I've got Gladiator grills hanging up on the walls in here because every time I find one, I grab it because they're cool. But the Razor grill is the one I really like.
I'm a big fan of the Razor grill. I love the Razor grill. And on any of the SJs, the Razor grill is absolutely my favorite. That's a good question. Nobody ever asked me that before, and I gotta put that one in the back of my mind and start asking people that when I interview.
Well, most go after the Gladiator grill because it's that class, and they're rare.
Yep.
But the Razor grill, man, and you can still find those.
Oh yeah, and the later SJ grills, I mean, they're all plastic. They just disintegrated. Somehow my J10 still has the original grill. That plasticky chrome is cracking off a little bit, but it's got, we'll just call it character, right?
Yeah.
So there is a question I ask every single person that comes on the Classic 4x4 podcast, and it's always fun. What was your first car or truck, that you drove to high school, when you got your license?
My first, of course, I had been messing with cars for a long time. Mm-hmm. But the first one that I owned, the first one that was actually the one I drove to high school, was a 1930 Model A coupe. And this thing was all, because I was a big fan of American Graffiti, so I had to have the John Milner car. And nobody could find 32s, but Model A's were more common. And this thing looked just like that. No hood, the frame was Z'd and all this stuff. No fenders, or it had the bobbed fenders on it. And of course, I painted it yellow. And it was a total piece of junk. This thing had been butchered on by every hot rodder. But I loved it. I mean, I learned more about what not to do off that car. So it was a great learning experience. I mean, all the wiring was red. Somebody just took a roll of red wiring and wired the whole car.
It was probably all like 12 gauge too.
Oh yeah, no fuses. Just
direct links.
No gas gauge. I had to go out on dates, and I had a dipstick, a paint stick that I'd get into the trunk, and dip it into the gas tank to see how much gas that I had.
That is too funny. Oh,
I was a high class bait,
But you were the guy with the cool car, and that's the 5-window, right? Is the 1930?
That's the 5-window coupe. Yeah, it was fun.
You're the second person we've had on the podcast who had a hot rod as their first car, and the other one was. Do you know Rob Ida?
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, Rob. Yeah,
I see Rob actually every Thursday. Rob is the iconic hot rod builder. He grew up in it. So Rob, and I see Rob actually every Thursday at the Asbury Park circuit. He lives in Asbury Park, 2 towns from me. And when I had him on the podcast, it was the same thing. He's like, my first truck was I think it was a Willys hot rod. He had a Willys truck hot rod. That was his first.
Yeah, he still does a lot of Willie stuff. Yeah,
he does a lot of really cool stuff, man. His shop is a couple miles away from me, but hey, he's one of those amazing people that I'm fortunate that I get to see on a weekly basis. That he's in our local Jersey Shore, car truck community. So that was my first car, but it was kind of a fair weather car. You know what I mean? It was that first car, but I needed something a little more reliable. So I got rid of that and bought a 1947 CJ2A that somebody had put a 265 V8 in with a 3-speed overdrive. This thing was decked. Oh, it had the great seats, and I love it. It was an old Navy Jeep, so it had the brass plaque on the dash, U.S. Department of the Navy. And this thing, it had the headers coming out the sides, dumping right underneath. Oh, man, I love that Jeep. It's the one vehicle I own that I never got a picture of. So,
but I
did it have the canvas top, the 2A canvas top, or?
No, it was like a later model best top, and it had the bucket seats in it. So somebody had modified it. It was like a blue lacquer with blue pinstriping on it. It was really well done for the era, especially. This is early 80s, remember? So it was, it still had the original 27 axles in it, and it had like probably 31-inch tall tires. It looked really good. And man, I drove that thing everywhere. I just had a great time with it. And I sold it when I was going to move to Nashville because I knew I couldn't make the trip to Nashville in it.
You could, but your internal organs may not have agreed with it.
Oh, yeah. And it was great. I always I missed that Jeep. I've always wondered where it went, and always wondered who got it because it was nice. No rust,
which is awesome. Which is rare.
Good job on it.
Definitely rare. So
yeah, it had a shifter that came up. It had like 5 shifters in it because it had the overdrive and everything. But it had the regular shifter, it came right up under your legs, and then it curved over, so it curved around your legs. So it had that big Roth shifter thing in it. I loved it.
So did it have like a Saturn or a Warren overdrive, or on the side?
Had a Warren overdrive.
Yeah.
Had the old Warren overdrive. Yeah.
So it's funny. I've talked about this in the podcast a couple of times because I built, again, back to all original specifications in 1965, Jeep CJ5A Tuxedo Park Mark IV.
Oh my gosh. Those are so cool.
Oh, so cool. And I got it. I bought it from another enthusiast in our community who had done a full mechanical rehab of it. I mean, had rebuilt everything mechanically, but cosmetically and body, he just kind of threw up the towel and said, I'm done with it. And that's when I bought it. That's when I got it. But I got it all original, all the chrome bits, everything. But one of the things that he had done on that 3-speed, non-synchronized transmission, right, was he added a Warren overdrive.
Oh my gosh, makes a world of difference.
A world of difference. And I tell people all the time, that was my favorite truck to drive ever.
Yeah.
I used to go first direct into second direct, and then I wouldn't even go into third direct. I would rev up the RPMs and just bring it up into overdrive, into second overdrive, and then into third overdrive. And man, that thing could conquer the world with that little F-134 Hurricane four-cylinder in it.
Yeah.
So
no, I love that.
Oh, super cool. So, I mean, for all of our listeners out there that don't follow Stacey on all the social channels, you have to follow him on all the social channels, Instagram, Facebook, at official Stacey David. Check him out. Check out his website online at staceydavid.com. And most importantly, you got to check him out on TV because you've been TV for 25 plus years?
This is our 25th year. Can you believe that?
Wow.
25 years.
Happy anniversary.
We've been really, really blessed. I'm telling you, it's been great.
So
I did trucks for 7 years, and then we're going into season 18 of Gearz.
Wow. So Gearz is, all of our listeners can see Gearz on Mav TV and Motor Trend and the Motor Trend channel also, right?
Yeah, we're on Motor Trend, of course, YouTube. And, we've got all kinds of new content coming out. I've got several different shows in the works that are all based off of that. So there's all kinds of cool stuff going on.
That is neat. And of course, we have to mention, I personally think the Classic 4x4 podcast is my listeners' favorite podcast, and everybody's favorite, car, or I should say truck and 4x4 podcast. But everybody out there needs to listen to Stacey's podcast also, which is Tales of a Gearhead.
Which you're going to be on. So if they like your podcast, they're going to love it because you're going to be on it.
I am honored to have you interview me and us kind of switch seats. That's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that recording. So thank you very much for having me on Tales of Gearhead too. So anybody can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. But one unique thing that I learned in our pre-interview today too was, you are, again, I've coined you the Godfather of trucks and 4x4s, of course. Right. You are the personality and the voice of our truck and 4x4 community. And you're obviously a very accomplished musician, but you're also an author and a writer. So tell me about some of the stuff that you've written in the past.
Well, I've got one children's book out called The Purple Bicycle.
Okay. That
you can get right on our website. And basically it's a story. It's really funny how that one came about. I wrote it years ago. And it's about, you remember growing up as a kid, we all had bicycles. Mm-hmm. And, that was your first bit of freedom. Your bicycle, you could leave home, you could hang out in the neighborhood, you go play hide and seek with everybody. And that bike became your first vehicle.
I can still tell you, by the way, what my first bike was, which was a white GT Performer.
Yep. And I bet you put the cards in the spokes.
Oh, of course. Yep. Pegs on the front and back, the whole 9 yards.
Well, the idea behind that story was that everybody's bike kind of took on the personality of the person. You had the person that was kind of big and strong would have like a mountain bike. And then you have the guy that was a fast runner would have the 10 speed. And then you have the guys that did all the BMX stunts and stuff, they would kind of fit that personality, And I thought, how interesting would it be if we covered some issues where, because the problem is a lot of people, when they go through life, they get very envious of other people. Well, if I just had that person's fill in the blank, if I had that person's money, if I had that person's build, if I had that person, whatever. And that makes us really miserable people when we think that way. So to kind of illustrate that to children, I was like, what if a bicycle did that? And so it's a story about a bicycle who happens to be purple in color. And he goes out and all the other bicycles and he starts wanting to be a different color because he thinks that's associated with a skill that another bicycle has. Now, I wrote this long before all of this race stuff and, Black Lives Matter and all that stuff was happening. And it really deals with that kind of stuff in a comical, simple children's way of how foolish that is.
Yeah.
When we start looking at that. So most of the stuff that I write has that. I just finished one out. It has to do with music or cars. One that I just finished that I'm getting Shannon Watts to actually do the illustrations on is called The Little Hot Rod.
Oh, that's cool.
It's the story of a car.
Breeding the next generation of us, right?
Absolutely. It's all for that. And so I've got several of those things. And I've got a whole series of little TV shows or books that have to do with kids growing up working on cars. And the good thing about that series is that my friends are going to be written into it. So you'll probably end up in that story.
Awesome. I love it.
As one of the little characters. It'd be like, there's little Chris.
Yeah. Well, anybody that knows me knows throughout my entire life, I have never been little, right? Little was never anything anybody ever said I was. I was always big Chris, right? I think even in high school, I was like 6'4", 300 pounds, right?
Oh my gosh. Well, there you are. You're big Chris.
Exactly. So that's cool.
Yeah, you're doing a bunch of stuff. There are a lot of things like that. I have a lot of people asking for some music stuff. So I've started to put together an album of car songs. A lot of them I've written. Some of them are classics. Just to kind of show that. One of these days I'll get it finished.
That's cool. Is there anything that you don't do? So TV personality, right? Podcast host, right? Author, accomplished musician. I mean, do you dance and juggle somewhere in there too?
No, I'm not. I've tried those.
That's
no,
awesome.
there's we do a lot of stuff like that. I've always had a lot of interests and a lot of things like that we've been involved in. So, and that's one of the things I try to encourage people is like, get out and experience life and try stuff. The biggest thing, and I was having this conversation, I've had this conversation with Foose a while back, and it usually comes up as I'm talking to people when we look at that, like you say, okay, you're the godfather of the truck thing. It's like, that's kind of funny to me because I would never look at myself that way. And a lot of people don't realize that there was a time that I didn't know jack about cars, and neither did Foose. And Jimi Hendrix didn't know how to play guitar. They had to learn. And there was a time they went through that learning stage when they sucked. But you're doing the best you can, And so I try to tell people to get out there, learn this stuff. Instead of trying to jump ahead and be the expert now. I see a lot of guys on YouTube trying to do that, and they're trying to, be an expert, but they're not. It's very obvious they're not. It's like, don't do that. Just do what you can and, let it go that way, because people will point out a phony.
Yep.
But they'll recognize somebody who's trying.
Yep. Somebody's who's trying, who's learning from their mistakes. Like I've been my entire life, every time I've been very entrepreneurial, and every time it's all a learning curve, and there's a lot of mistakes, but it's just not giving up and continuing to learn from those mistakes. And happiness I learned a long time ago. When I was young, I thought money was happiness. It was all about money. That's what'll make you happy. And as I got older and had a lot of fun stuff, I realized it's not about material items. It's not about your
I'd rather have a Jeep than money.
And it is. It's about being content. Being content is what equals happiness, right? Being content with what you have, the people around you, your family, that's where happiness lies. And sadly, I wish I knew that when I was a lot younger, but hey, fortunately we all grow up and, shoulda, coulda, woulda, right?
Oh yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Everything's a learning experience. And the day you quit learning is the day you die.
I agree 100%. Always new things. Always be a student. But you mentioned something that actually reflects in my own life, right? So, I didn't grow up. I grew up in New Jersey, in a suburb of New York City. I didn't grow up in Idaho or Montana. I didn't have a dad who had a flat fender like yourself and an outbuilding where he could teach you to tinker. Like my dad was an art teacher who drove a pea green diesel Volkswagen Rabbit. Right. If you remember those, it was a manual transmission.
Oh, those are hot, man. People love those rabbits, those diesel rabbits.
But back in the day, they weren't that hot, right?
Oh, they were third. Yeah.
And my mom was a nurse. She drove a Volvo wagon. Like I didn't grow up around trucks or anything like that. It's not something that, and I've always been into cars, right? Cars and trucks as a young buck, but nobody ever had them in my family. I was never exposed to them. And, I'm going to fanboy out a little bit, and I'm going to say really at the point in my life where I was very impressionable, which was like my later high school years, early college years, and even, the first couple of years into my career, which is also going to, by the way, play into how my wife ended up requesting you as a guest, right? So, I literally, would watch a lot of TV shows. And the one TV show that I watched religiously, right, which really formed my love for trucks and 4x4s that I've, am now enjoying in this part of my life and career, and it's everything to me, was trucks. Right. So, so if some people have, their father that shows them the ropes and has trucks, I have Stacey David to thank for that.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, I'm telling you what, I can't tell you how much that means to me, man. When people say that, I have a lot of people now coming up going, I'm in this industry because of you. And I'm like, in my thing, if somebody came up and handed me a Grammy or an Oscar, and said, or put me in the SEMA Hall of Fame or whatever, I wouldn't give a rat about that compared to that compliment right there. Because there's a future in that compliment.
But it's true,
a trophy is just something that sits on the wall, and that means so much to me, because that's what those shows were about. And see, over the years, I remember when Monster Garage first came out.
Mhm.
It was the first of the reality shows. It was automotive reality shows. It was based off of what they were doing on American Chopper. And this was about the third or fourth year of trucks. So we were well established at that point. And trucks and even Gearz has always been a how-to show.
Mhm.
That's what we do. We don't do reality stuff. And there's a big difference, a whole different approach. And one is, a how-to show is about learning and showing people how to do stuff. Reality shows is really about me. Let me show you what I can do. I'm amazing. And it's all about shenanigans and that kind of thing. And there's a place for that as well. But I remember people coming up and going, hey, how are you going to compete with Jesse James? And I was like, I'm not.
Yep.
I'm like, Jesse does his thing, and I hope it works for him. I said, but we don't do that. That's like, that would be like going to a music thing. That would be like Eric Clapton saying, I'm going to play like Chet Atkins.
It's a different style. It's a different vibe.
Different things. And each has their place, and the people that like one is going to go there. The people like the other one's going to go there. But, but the far reaching effects of that, it means so much more to me to hear that. So,
and I can't thank you enough. Like, I didn't have, I had my parents are amazing people. They gave me a great upbringing, but I didn't have the garage out back with the flat fender that I could tinker on. I had Stacey David on Saturday mornings that really spawned my love for trucks and 4x4. So I can't thank you enough for that.
That's awesome.
But we also have to talk about how my wife ended up requesting Stacey David of all people, right? So
yeah.
I graduated college in the early 2000s, and I had a job in finance right out of the gate for a company I'd interned for. And we were living in a one-bedroom apartment in New York City, on the east side of New York City. And every Saturday morning, we used to wake up. We would make coffee and order our bagels from the world famous Asa Bagel on 2nd Avenue.
Oh my
right?
gosh.
So, and we would watch Trucks. So I don't remember. And at that time, I think Trucks was on Spike, I believe, at that point, right?
Okay. So we were already past TNN.
Yeah. So way past, so we're early 2000s. I think you were on Spike at the time.
Year 4 or something like that. Yeah.
I don't remember when you actually aired, but you re-aired, I think, on Saturday or Sunday mornings, but I believe it was Saturday mornings. And so that was like our thing. We would sit down, drink our coffee, eat our Asa bagels, right? I still remember to this day, we used to get 2 sesame bagels with olive cream cheese, right? So all the listeners, that sounds disgusting. Awesome. But in reality, if you're a New Yorker, it's amazing, right? And we would watch Trucks, right?
Yeah.
And I watched a lot of car and truck shows at that time, but that was the one show that my wife would not bust my chops on about watching, right? She would sit there and enjoy it. I always thought that she was just doing it to be nice, but all these years later, 20 years later, out of nowhere, she says, I want to have a listener request. And I want it to be Stacey David, which is mind blowing that you lived in my wife's brain for 20 plus years somehow.
I tell you what, that's awesome, man. That's great to hear. And like I always say, it's probably because it's that guy with the girl's name.
Yep.
I got with Gail Banks one time out there because he's a really good friend of mine. And I said, Gail, you know what we need to do? We need to get me and you and Carol Shelby and Connie Coletta, and we need to open a hot rod shop, and either that or do nails and hair. We all have girls' names. And of course, Gail was like, oh, that's hilarious. He said, of course, Carol Shelby might not get a kick out of that. But
that's like, too funny. That is too funny. Actually, I will tell you, out of today, I saw do you know what New Legend 4x4 is?
Yeah, they do all of the Power Wagons.
Well, no, they don't. They do not Power Wagons. They do Scouts, right? So Sean Barber, who I fortunate to consider a friend, who I consider a friend, and I've had on the show before, but he actually just built a 1967 Scout 800 for a mutual friend of ours. And he has built, like, all his stuff is investment quality builds, 6-figure builds. These things are amazing. They're beautiful. And he's built in his, 20-year career, he's only actually built about 200 of these bespoke investment quality builds, right? So this was, and that's between Scout 2s and 800s. And a friend of mine stopped by my garage earlier today with his new Legend Scout 800. And man, that thing is like nothing. It is ground up build on a JK frame. The only thing with an LS, I mean, the only thing other than the badges and the body, that is the only things that are actual original International Harvester. This thing is gorgeous, and the caliber of the build is just second to none. And the fact that I got to see one of those right in person when there's only 200 out in existence is rare. So that was my fun this morning when I was tinkering around doing the interior on my K5 Blazer in my garage.
I love the Scouts. I've always been a big fan of theirs. I was doing a thing for the History Channel one time, and it was the history of the 4x4. And actually, you can see the show if you log on to Netflix or whatever. But I did a couple of them for them. And unbeknownst to me, Ford was one of the main sponsors of this show, because they didn't tell me that, but we had shot it in our shop there. And so they asked me about the beginnings of the 4x4 world. And I started going on about the Scout. And then I was like, the Scout was the first thing. And I said, basically, the Bronco was a total ripoff of the Scout and everything. And because it was, Scout International had the idea. They just didn't have the motor. If you look at the original Scout with the optional half cab and all of the things, and then you set an early Bronco right beside the same vehicle. They're both square, boxy things. The difference was obviously Ford had a better suspension under there, and they had the motor. And but body wise, they offered it in a half cab, they offered it in the full top, they offered all the roadster doors. They all did that. And, Jeep did that too. But I got to tell you, those Scouts are coming up in the market. We're starting to see the Bronco effect right now. So, Ford announced that the Broncos got so high.
Oh, and they've come down, actually. I just talked to a client the other day that reached out to ask me to represent the sale and market and advise him on the sale of his Bronco, his first-gen Bronco. And, I showed him all the comps and everything. And he said, wow, the market has changed. I said, yes, it has. We talked about all the analytics, and he's going to move forward because he wants it gone. But, he had it early, but we saw that Bronco effect where Ford announced that new Bronco, and then the first gen Broncos just shot up through the roof. Everybody had to have the first gen Bronco, and now we're starting to see that same cycle happen with Scouts, right? Especially the Scout 2s, the Travelers, the Terras, but especially the Scout 2s and even the 800s, where now that Volkswagen Group is saying, "Hey, we're going to bring the Scout back as an EV." I mean, the Scout market has just run up. These things were like throwaway, rotted, vehicles in fields 10 years ago. Now people are clamoring to get them. It's amazing how the cycles work and how the markets work. But let's talk about some of your projects. What is and I know you have done hundreds of builds, hundreds of projects, and this is a hard question to ask, but what was your favorite build or project you ever did?
That's like asking your favorite child. Man.
I know, right? That's a good way to put it.
I hate that. I had talked with Chip Foose about that a lot, and he hates that question too. Because now his answer, he's always like, "Oh, the one I'm working on right now." Yeah, I'm like, "Yeah, great." That's
the best answer, though. We'll give you that.
Yeah, Chip. And it's one of those pat answers because it gets you out of really answering the question. And I tell you what, I mean, there's a lot of answers to that. Everything that I build has a purpose. I don't ever build anything just because. And that's, so it's not just to amaze people or bolt parts on or build things or fabricate something. It has to have a purpose. So it depends on what I want to get out and drive or what I want to enjoy that time. So some, vehicles that were built for like SEMA or for different clients and things like that have a different degree of love. There's always your DNA in them. So there's that. But there are some that stand out. Obviously, the Sergeant Rock project, which I've got sitting right around the corner here. That's that Power Wagon. that I did. And
you have a die cast of that, don't you?
Yeah, I've got it. Actually, I do. I have one here.
I think you showed it to me in our break. Yeah, that is so cool.
Yeah. We got those on our website, but there's a whole story about how that came about. But obviously a very strong supporter of our military. Mm-hmm. That's what that build was all about, was to recognize our military. Matter of fact, I've got several military style builds because they're so influential of everything that we do, especially in the Jeep and 4x4 world.
Of course, yeah.
So there's that one. Obviously, the Copperhead truck was very unique. And
what did the Copperhead start as, though?
It was a 67 C10 truck, mm-hmm. and it started out as a frame and cab and a title. And basically, the point of that build was to show that was right when replacement body panels and bodies were starting to become available, mm-hmm. and nobody had ever built a truck using mostly reproduction parts. Basically, like I said, I started with the frame and cab. So all the front sheet metal, all the bed, all the rear sheet metal was all aftermarket replacement stuff. And a lot of the stuff didn't fit that well back then. It's gotten much better. But it was the start of that, to where back in the day, if you were trying to restore something, especially a truck, because they were the dregs of society. If you had a Camaro, you could probably find a replacement fender or hood, because people started repopping those. But trucks, they were way down the list. And so you had to hunt junkyards. If you were restoring a Scout or a Bronco or a pickup, you tried to find one that had no rust on it, or you had to fix the rust. Mm-hmm. And this was kind of the start of a change of mentality of the aftermarket, that you can get something, with just a good cab, and all the other stuff you get brand new. And so that was very influential. The fact that I got the very first 572 crate engine from Chevy, that went in there.
That's pretty cool. That's a hallmark.
Oh, yeah. And so there's that. There's a bunch of course, the Crazy Horse Bronco. It's still out there. It changed hands again. I think I went through one of the auctions, and a guy contacted me. I try to keep track of where they're at. Mm-hmm. And the guy contacted me that had it. He says, "Hey, I've got this, got your Crazy Horse Bronco." I got back with him and never heard back from him. So I don't know if his wife killed him for buying it or what. But anyway, so there's that. And right now, one of the new projects I'm getting into on the show. Oh, I don't know if you saw last year, I rolled in, I'll get this. I go into a garage. I'm getting ready to do a Cherokee Chief. Now, I always love the Chiefs.
The two-door SJs are my absolute favorite.
I had an all-rust free one that came out of California. Needed a complete build. I wasn't going to get to it on the show. So I'm like, I probably ought to trade that or move it on something. Now, I grew up, Dad always had the Jeepster Commandos. Mm-hmm. And they were kind of an odd bird, but they were really cool. Dad did things with that you should never be able to do with a Jeep. Mm-hmm. So I had that childhood thing. So I always wanted one, because Dad would never let me modify it as a kid. Mm-hmm. Dad was like, got to be stock, son. Factory, original. Like, oh my gosh. Yeah. That's like the worst thing you could say to me. So I always wanted to take one and modify it. So a friend of mine gets with me and he goes, "Hey, are you interested in a Jeepster Commando?" And I was like, "Well, yes, I happen to be." So I go over to his garage, and there sits a 1967 factory convertible. Now, wow. I don't know if you're familiar with the factory convertibles. They had a power soft top and the Continental kit on the back.
I've actually never even heard or seen of that before. And I'm a Jeep guy inside and out.
They only made like 1,200 of them.
Wow.
And so I get hold. So I work a deal. I trade the full-size Jeep on it. I get it back, and I figured it's got 108,000 miles on it, looking at the odometer. And I start pulling it apart, and I get hold of the Jeepster man out there, Market Jeepster man, who specializes in parts for those and early Willys. And he about falls through the phone when I show him pictures of it. He goes, "You realize what you have there?" And I was like, "Well, I think I got to," because there's no rust really. Mm-hmm. It's all there. It's got butchered wiring, typical things. I said, but I think I originally thought it was 108,000 miles. It's showing 8,000 miles. I said, I think it's an 8,000 mile original. And so we started looking at stuff. He says, you definitely have that.
Wow.
And so I did a thing on the show last year with it because I had originally set out, my plan for that was to throw some good axles under it, put a V8 in it, do a nice, put 35s on it, nice trail rig, that kind of thing.
Now, here's a question though. Did it have the Buick Dauntless V6?
Yes.
So
yes.
It's amazing. Almost all the Commandos that I ever come across have the Buick Dauntless V6 in them, even though I believe they were factory with the F-134, the Hurricane, right? Or
now, you could get it either or.
Okay.
You could get it with the 4-cylinder or the V6. And that Buick V6 is a fantastic engine.
Yeah.
That's what Dad had in his. So I got to looking at it, and that was one of the things when you get something like that, you don't butcher something like that up. That vehicle original, one of those sold at Mecum last year for $65,000.
Yeah.
Pretty much in that kind of shape. So and I'll get into that. That's some of the stuff I want to ask you is on when you're on our podcast is about the auction deal. But so the way I approached it on the show is like, what happens when you buy a project with a certain plan in mind, and then you learn something about it that changes that? What do you do? And so that's how I addressed it, because that happens all the time. But people will buy an old Chevelle, and then they'll find out they thought it was a factory SS. Come to find out it's not. Or the other way around. Or there's, a bag of money in the back seat, or a dead body, or a history, some seriously crazy things have happened like that.
But the answer to that question is you don't do anything. You refurbish it, you get it to pristine condition, and you admire it.
Yeah. And get it to a collector and get it into that. And, and what I try to approach people on, because they'll look at it and they go, well, it's my vehicle. I can do anything I want. And
which is true.
You're right. You can. And you got the freedom to do it. It's free country. Wonderful. Just understand what you're doing. And then when you go out to the car show and people absolutely rip you to pieces for butchering up something, don't say we didn't warn you.
Yep.
Because they will.
We all have to play our part in preserving history, because the fact of the matter is that the internal combustion engine is going to be a thing of the past in a few years, let alone a 1967 Commando factory soft top, power soft top.
Oh, yeah.
I do agree with you, though, and I'm a big advocate. I talk about this a lot on the show, where, it's your truck, it's your time, it's your money. Whatever you do with it, as long as it puts a smile on your face, no matter what anybody else says or what anybody else, quabbles about, as long as when you open up that garage and you turn that light on and it puts a smile on your face, that's all that matters. But I will say, butchering up a piece of history like that is definitely a sin. No question. Well,
it's just, I just want people to know the whole story. In other words, it's like, let me just tell you all aspects here. Then you make your decision. Then if you willfully tear something up, you can't say, I didn't know.
Yep.
And then, because guys do that, they'll tear stuff up and keep that kind of thing. Just to show you how important that passion is. I have a really good friend, car collector, had a big collection. He had Hemi cars, muscle cars, Ferraris, had all kinds of stuff. Got tired of taking care of 30 or 40 cars, ran them all through the auction, sold them all except for 3 cars. And the one he kept was a 1977 Camaro that had the big tuft interior fur in it, big wide side pipes and the sides Krager mags on it. And it said Showtime on the side. It was right out of 1980, whatever.
Tell me it was purple and gold also.
It pretty much had a big flake in it, had all kinds of murals all painted all over it. Had the big T-tops and everything. And, the fake wood and all that junk in it. And the thing was, his wife looked at him, she said, okay, you got rid of the Ferraris for that? He goes, that was the car I wanted in high school. That's the car that makes me smile every time I go out there. And I said, you and me both. As soon as I walked in and saw Showtime, I couldn't help but start laughing because I was like, now I wouldn't have kept it over a Ferrari, but that was his childhood, you know? And it's like, more power to you, man. And he'll have more fun out of that. I had a big 2.4 barrel sticking out from under it. It's great.
But he'll enjoy that more than he'll enjoy any Ferrari or anything else in his collection.
And I guarantee you, when he takes that down to Cars and Coffee, that will get more attention than anything there.
Oh, no question. It's
just funny because it's different
that you say that somebody just liquidated a lot of their collection. I recently did that. I'd say about a year ago. I had just a bunch of trucks. I had like 8 trucks, and I got to the point where it's a lot of time and it's a lot of work. And I just you can't drive. You can only drive one at a time. There were only a few that I was driving. So I adopted this mentality where if I'm not driving it, I'm not enjoying it, and I'm not giving it the love it deserves, it needs to be passed on down the line to somebody that will. Right. And I started to do that. I started to get rid. I had a Grand Wagoneer, I had a CJ8 Scrambler, which I probably shouldn't have gotten rid of because I built that from the ground up. Right. I actually started with a title and a VIN plate. And it's amazing. These CJs you could build from the ground up with a throttle down custom frame. Like you said, the body panels. But I've whittled down to 3 right now. And it's so much more pleasurable just to have the 3 that I use, I drive, I enjoy. There's a lot to be said about that, but it's like you said, you got to learn eventually, right? What do you have in your personal collection right now?
Well, there's all these ones from the show. I've got my tow truck that I'm finishing up. That's my international tow truck. That's,
cool.
That's heavy metal. That is awesome.
Is it a medium duty? Like, is that the 345 in it, or?
No, it had the 304 in it. No, it had the 345 in it. That I got running, got rid of that. Now it has a nasty Duramax diesel in it.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's 650 horse, 1,300 foot-pounds. PPE did the motor on it.
Wow.
And that is full custom deal. It is a Lodestar 1600 cab over.
Super cool.
And it got the big dual tow beams out the back. I started on the show a few years ago, and that one kind of got stalled with COVID, so I'm back on that one. Then I have a 59 panel truck, Ford panel truck, with over 1,000 horsepower, blown big block Ford in it. That's the SR71 truck. That'll be back on the show. I've got a Snowcat, an old Thiokol Snowcat.
Whoa, I could talk about Thiokol Snowcat. Now, here's the question. Is it 2 tracks or the 4-track with the pivoting body?
Well, that's the Tucker that had the 4-track.
Oh,
yeah, the Tucker. Oh my gosh, the Tuckers are awesome. They're hard to find too. Yeah. The Thiokols are the ones that look more like the tank. They were like in The Shining.
Okay. Yep.
And I have the Imp, the smaller Imp, and I'm looking to pick up a Sprite, which is the bigger one.
Cool. Then
I have a tracked military vehicle. I got a Husky 116 out there, which is an amphibious Vietnam era.
That's cool.
Yeah. So there's that. I've got my 99 Dodge 4x4. I've got the Jeepster. I just picked up that Mighty Mite. I've got the Cheetah that I'm doing. I have my 70s van that I'm putting an LS7 in.
Tell me it's got shag carpet in it. Come on, give it to me.
It will. Oh, it will.
Oh,
And side
yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it'll either have the shag carpet in it or the wood paneling.
Or like the little round fishbowl window in the back.
No, I'm not doing that because it is a panel truck. So I'm going to do the mural. I'm going to do some sort of crazy drawing on it. And instead of side pipes, I'm putting zoomies to stick out the side. So I've got the same thing going on.
That's cool.
The vans are hot. The vans are hot now.
Yeah,
same thing.
They're coming into their own right now, man. But I want to guess what Stacey David daily drives, right? So I'm thinking. So this is a weird phenomenon that I've noticed with truck guys, right? We all have these classic American and European trucks, but a lot of truck guys, including myself, drive a Toyota as our daily driver. And the justification is, I deal with all these classic trucks and 4x4s in my garage that I'm constantly tinkering with. There's always something going on. For my daily, I don't want to deal with that. So I drive a Toyota. So
Yeah.
I am thinking that you drive a Toyota Tundra.
I would like to have a Toyota Tundra.
Okay, what is it? What do you drive?
I like Toyotas. I've always liked Toyotas, from the Land Cruisers and all that stuff. My daily driver is a Dodge Ram 1500.
Oh, Laramie?
What's that?
A Laramie?
Yeah, with all the leather interior and stuff. It's 2012, and I'm on my third motor in it.
Okay.
And, I tell you what, I've got my 99 Dodge, which is my short bed. That's the little red wagon. And that was my daily driver for a long time. And I'm actually going back through that and refurbishing that. I love that truck. But cool. The problem is I needed a four-door truck because I'm carrying clients and people around all the time. So the Ram that I've got is my main thing. It's four-wheel drive, and I use it to pull my trailers and all kinds of stuff. So that's I'm a truck guy when it comes to that.
That's fun.
I just use it for everything. I'm always throwing stuff in it.
That's super cool, man. That's awesome. So you heard it here first. The 99, or actually no, the 2012 and the 99 Ram is Stacey David's daily driver. That's awesome. That's super cool. Yeah. As we get into the end of the podcast here, what projects are you working on right now on the show that the listeners can tune in, check out your show, Gearz on Mav TV and Motor Trend to take a look at?
A lot of the ones I mentioned are on there, but one that I've just started that I'm really excited about is it's a 1940 Chevy Coupe. And I'm building basically a basic hot rod. And, and the reason I've gotten into that is because as you notice the values of these vehicles and stuff going up, the really hot thing now are like 60s, 70s, 80s muscle cars and on up into the 90s and that kind of stuff. The Fast and Furious crowd is starting to move into that. And what has happened is all of these 1940 down cars are really affordable now.
Very affordable.
They're coming out of garages of guys that have passed away or, they're just too old to mess with them, or they've been, passed down to family members. And a lot of these were cars that these people hoarded for a long time. So they're either all original or they were turned into a fairly decent street rod through the 80s and 90s. And now nobody wants them. They have tweed interiors and, the pastel paints and all that kind of stuff that nobody really wants. So you can pick these things. I picked up this 40 Chevy Coupe. This is a pretty much rust-free 5-window coupe for $7,000.
Does not surprise me.
And nobody wanted it. And everything is available for that, either original or hot rod. So basically what we're doing is showing guys, it's like, okay, here's how to build a nice, fun, affordable hot rod, kind of taking you back to the basics. No fuel injection. I got a tri-power on it, but I'm not going into a particular era. You got to be careful with that because it's like, I'm going to build a 50s era car. Well, now you're buying a bunch of used parts and you're trying to buy things, and for the guys that want to do that, that's great. But it doesn't really help the guy that's kind of a beginner trying to get into it. Like in this 40 Chevy, I didn't want to do the LS route, but a small block Chevy is the engine to go. Now,
of course,
you could put a nailhead Buick or something exotic, but you're paying twice the amount of money to build one, find one, and that's for a different level of builder. This is for these young guys that are like, I want to get into something for 10 grand, 20, whatever. And it's like these old hot rods is that sort of car. You can pick these things up. Zach, one of the guys that works with this, he's a young guy. He just picked up an old Model A with a rumble seat.
Oh, and that's super cool.
I think he gave $12,000 for it, drove it home, all original. And he's going to do a real kind of 50s build on it because that's what he's into. But you see, you can't get into a second gen Camaro for even close to that.
No. You know what it is, and I've seen this being a student of the market, is the cycles are purely tangent on the generational change, right? So at one point, those 40s and 50s, when it's a coming of age thing, right? So what did you love, like us 80s kids, right? So I'm an 80s kid. Us 80s kids are the ones that have driven up the classic truck and 4x4 markets, purely because those 70s and 80s, C and K 10s and 20s, the K5s, the CJs, the Scouts, right? The FJ, Land Cruisers, I can go down the line. That's what was cool and interesting. And on the road, when we were little kids, in the movies and we were looking out our parents' window in the back of that, that green diesel Volkswagen Rabbit, right? When we were driving down the street. And then they became throwaway cars, right? They cycled out. They were pennies. And now we've all, gotten into our late 30s and 40s, and we have discretionary income, and we're like, that's what I want now. And we just run this market up. But we all get older, and eventually we can't, deal with them anymore. We don't have the time. And as that generation changes, there isn't a buyer on the other end of that. So that is awesome that you're reinvigorating these. I don't even want to call them value vehicles, but you're bringing them back into the fold, and you're really recognizing the heritage and the importance of keeping those alive.
And see, the thing is, thank you for that, because that's very important to me on that. And another thing to look at here is that street rod market is kind of what started the aftermarket. Mm-hmm. So if you go to any aftermarket company, like I did it, the steering column guys, they're coming out with newer steering columns for later model vehicles. But if you need something for a 40 Chevy, they got 10 of them.
Yep.
Because they established that market 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So they still have those part numbers. Same with the wiring harnesses. Same with, if you want to put air conditioning in it, you call up Vintage Air, and they're like, oh yeah, we have a kit for that car. It's already there, and they're cheap because that's not their hot product. Mm-hmm. That whole market has already been established. So,
well, now people are going to listen to this and start going out and running up the market, buying these things and running them up, running them back up.
Oh yeah.
But hey, we're going to be having this conversation in 20, 30 years from now. And we're going to talk about 80s CJs and 70s, square bodies. And those, those things are right now, they're hot. The Scouts, the Broncos, first gen Broncos, they're hot. But 20, 30 years from now, we're going to be having the same conversation. You're going to be like, I just got a first gen, fully restored, original Bronco for $7,000, right? It's a $60,000 truck today. So,
that happens all the time.
Yeah, it's just market cycles. It's the way things work. But Stacey, I really can't thank you enough for being your time, your participation, and being a guest on the Classic 4x4 podcast. It's not only very important to our listeners, but also myself. The fact that I get to, everything. The guy that I idolized that taught me how to tinker and really, was the person that put that spark in me, and that that drove that love for classic, custom modified trucks and 4x4s is on the other side of the screen. I get to interview them, at this point in my life. So
thank you. That means a lot. That means a lot.
So thank you so much for joining us today, Stacey. Your time is again, very appreciated. And for all of our listeners out there, you got to follow Stacey on all the social channels at official Stacey David. Check him out online, staceydavid.com. Of course, watch him on TV on his show Gearz, which is on Mav TV and also on Motor Trend. And you got to listen to his podcast, available wherever you listen to podcasts, Tales of the Gearhead, because you might, hint, 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 have your favorite podcast host as a guest on that Tales of Gearhead podcast. I don't know. Is it going to happen, Stacey? Is it not?
Yes, it's going to happen. Yes.
Thanks a lot, Stacey. Have a great day, man.
Thank you. You too.
Stacey David is an absolute legend. I'm honored to have had the opportunity to interview him, and he really is the godfather of trucks. Check out his shows, follow him on the social channels. But stay tuned for our next episode. We get to talk about a topic that I'm actually personally interested in and curious about. And I don't know what you might call them. Everybody calls them something different. Sometimes people call them key trucks, K trucks, mini trucks. But whatever you call them, stay tuned and listen to our next episode.